going back to a fair claim settlement, ensuring all the damage is addressed properly, all the legitimate, reasonable damage gets addressed. A lot of homeowners don't understand why there's a discrepancy between the contractor and the insurance company. They're like, well, why are you so much higher?
It's simple.
But I like what you have. I like the iPhone analogy that you use. It really, we actually started using that with homeowners, and it kind of breaks it down, and it makes sense.
Sure.
And I guess touch on that.
Sure. So if Apple wants to subcontract out the building of the iPhone to a company in China, let's say that there's 2,000 components, let's just say, that go into building the iPhone. So they're going to send out the specs of how they want this phone built by this company that builds electronics and exactly how they want the phone built. And here's the 2,000 components. All right? So let's say the company that's building the phone installs 1,800 of the components and leaves 200 components out. What are you going to get?
Not an iPhone.
Are you getting what you paid for? No. You're paying for a phone that has 2,000 components, and you're getting a phone that only has 1,800 in. So you're getting less than. Same thing with a homeowner's claim. All right? So what you're paying for is to be made whole. Minimum construction best practices. At least the minimum construction best practices. Right? And so what they'll do is they'll make an initial offer to settle, put together by an adjuster who has no background in construction. He doesn't know what he's doing for the most part. He doesn't know how to the means and methods to restore this property. He's never done one in his life. And he's writing together an initial offer to settle a claim. It's just that. It's a financial negotiation. And he writes an estimate to do work that he's never done. What kind of estimate do you think you're going to get? Do you think you're going to get one written to the minimum construction best practices? Obviously not. How could they possibly? Because they don't have the expertise to be able to write an estimate like that, because they've never done that before in their lives. What kind of estimate do you think you would get for an automobile collision to adequately repair it correctly is if the adjuster's never done body work before? They've had a 3-day class. Do you see how ludicrous it is? So why would you trust an adjuster? Ask the questions. How long have you been an adjuster? How long have you worked for this insurance company? Tell me about your background in construction. Tell me how many roofs you've done as a contractor. Oh, you've never done any roofs as a contractor. Then how can you possibly know what you're doing up there? Tell me, are you an expert in storm damage assessment to roofs? No? Then why are you here? And if you are, how did you get this expertise? How did you obtain the expertise in roof storm damage assessment that you claim to have? And if you don't have that, then why are you here? Why don't you go home and your insurance company sends someone out who does have the expertise that I would want to make sure that my loss is thoroughly investigated?
And the homeowner has every right to request that.
Well, of course they do.
And oftentimes the initial adjusters don't even have authority. If it's a large claim that is going to exceed a certain dollar amount, $20,000, $30,000, oftentimes we get the adjusters that say, I don't have the authority to write about that.
They're not even adjusters anymore. They're not adjusters. Think about what the term adjuster means. It means he has the authority to make adjustments to his estimate. So if you or the consumer, you as the contractor or the consumer, make a compelling, cogent argument that I need to have these line items included in my estimate so as to meet minimum construction best practices, if they're an adjuster, they can make adjustments to their estimate to include those line items. If they don't have the authority to do that, they're not adjusters except in name only. All they are is lackey estimators.
So maybe that's a question the property owner should ask as well, is do you have the authority to write an estimate that might be?
When I started out, they had the authority to write a check on the spot. The adjuster would go out to the car, they'd calculate up the estimate, and they'd write a check on the spot. They had check writing authority, up to $20,000, $50,000 worth of a check writing authority. How many do you think have that nowadays?
It doesn't happen, rarely.
They're actually getting rid of those older adjusters because the older adjusters know that the estimates are to be written to minimum construction best practices, and they don't want them to do that. They want them to do what they're told.
So then we would give them our estimate, legitimate, reasonable line items. They say no because of their guidelines.
So the
Puts homeowner
consumer
in a
asks
bad
a
spot.
question. The consumer asks this very relevant question. If there's line items on Constantine's estimate that are illegitimate or unreasonable, please point out those line items, and I don't want to just take your word for it that they're illegitimate or unreasonable. I want you to explain to me, Mr. Adjuster, how did you arrive at the conclusion that line items 17, 21, and 25 are illegitimate or unreasonable? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Hold their feet to the fire, make them explain using facts and evidence to justify the omission of those line items. If they're unable to or unwilling to, there's the prima facie evidence that the line item must be legitimate or reasonable. Otherwise, the adjuster could surely be able to articulate how they arrived at the conclusion that they should be omitted. So hold the adjuster's feet to the fire. How did you come to the conclusion that these line items are either illegitimate or unreasonable and should be omitted from my estimate?
And then the homeowner asks that. The adjuster still stonewalls them per company guidelines.
So
And
when
then-
did I, as a consumer, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go. You're good.
So when did I, as a consumer, contractually obligate myself to your company's internal guidelines?
Exactly.
I have no obligation. There's nowhere in my contract with you, in my insurance policy, that obligates me to your company's internal guidelines. Now, you're obligated through your employment to your company's internal guidelines, but I'm not. You can't foist extra contractual obligations on me from your company because I'm not contractually obligated to abide by those. So the consumer would be wise to ask that question. When did I contractually obligate myself to your company's internal guidelines? Write them a letter and ask that question. All communications between consumers and adjusters should be in writing. Otherwise, how can you prove what was said? How can you document the conversation and what was said if you're saying it verbally? All communication between the consumer and the adjuster should be done in writing. A very wise consumer would always do such a thing. That way, everything's documented now, isn't it?